Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Rock Your Shine After You've Been Cracked Wide Open. You may recognize my guest this week, Rebecca Hewitt. She was a guest in March of 2022. She's episode 35, which I recommend anyone who has not seen the first episode that you may want to hear Rebecca's story. And so today we are continuing her story because of the healing that has happened since that original episode. And since that time, Rebecca has retired from her previous vocation as a hairstylist and has gone through grief and loss coaching. And she is now coaching individuals and supporting individuals who are experiencing deep grief and loss over the loss of a child, over the loss due to an overdose, or any other kind of loss that you are experiencing in your life. So it is a deep honor and pleasure to welcome Rebecca to this episode. Hi.
Thank you.
So, welcome to the show. I am thrilled to pieces to have you here for so many different reasons. This is the first time that I have invited a guest back because I think that you are such a beautiful example of somebody who is clearly rocking their shine after their world blew apart. And I just could not wait to have you back. So, thank you for agreeing to come back on the show.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for having me back.
So I thought it might be good for people who did not see the first episode. We're going to be showing a little clip, but maybe we could sort of set the stage before we show that clip of what is your story. Just tell us briefly before we watch that clip about why you're here
Yeah.
and what happened to you.
So in 2021, my son died of an accidental overdose of fentanyl poisoning, really. He had been suffering from substance use disorder for 10 years prior to that and was in a rehabilitation facility. He was in recovery for a year and a half. And then we don't really know what happened. He bought what he thought was a certain drug. It was fentanyl. He did not know it was fentanyl, and he died that night.
So we're going to set the stage just to show this clip. And this was the evening that your ex-husband, Chris, was trying to contact him. And you had heard from him the previous day. You had sent, I think, a text, but you hadn't heard back from him, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So I just briefly want to show this clip from our interview.
The fourth, and his father calls me and is like, have you heard from Skylar? And I said, well, I talked to him 2 days ago. And he said, well, I've been calling him constantly. He's not returning my calls, which is not like him. He always calls his dad back, always, always. And so this had been like a day and a half. And I said, well, maybe he lost his phone because he does do that all the time. And he had gotten back together with his girlfriend. He could have been with her, and, it could have been anything, but he was panicking. So I started panicking. And so he said, I'm going to call the police. I want them to go and check his house and call Jamie, who was the director of this facility. So I started to panic, and he said he'd call me back. So I'm sitting there and I'm kind of rocking and getting more panicked by the minute. And then I got the call from his dad, and he said, we lost our son tonight. And really, that's all I heard. And that whole night was such a blur, but I think I started screaming, and my partner, Scott, came running upstairs and took the phone, and I don't even know. The next thing I remember was being downstairs on the couch, and I wasn't sobbing or heaving or any of that. It was just pouring out of my eyes, just tears were just nonstop pouring out of my eyes for hours. I was rocking back and forth saying, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do, like over and over again, because I don't think my body, my mind could handle any of it at that moment. Like I just didn't know what to do.
So that is where you were. And, when we talked last, I think Skylar had only been gone for about a year at that time. And so here we are now, it's over 2 years later. Let's talk about what this past year and a half has looked like for you and the journey that you've been on in your own deep healing around the loss of your son.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
A lot has happened this year, things I never imagined. I talk about healing a lot, and, people are like, oh, you never heal from grief. And that is true, but I feel like you can heal your life. It looks completely different than it did before. I lost Skylar. Of course it does. He was my favorite person and he is gone. And I'm going to feel that for the rest of my life. But there are ways of healing. And I know because I've done it. And part of that was finding purpose in my life and meaning and honoring Skylar. And I knew, even in my really deep grief, I knew that I needed to help other people. I knew somehow that was going to help me heal and go forward in this life without my son. And, I say without my son, but I know every day that Skylar's with me. He's my silent partner. He is part of every single thing I do. And that helps.
Yeah, there were so many things that struck me when I talked to you during those early phases of you walking through some really dark times, because of course I've had an opportunity to talk to you outside of that interview and sort of follow your healing journey. And I think, and I've said this many, many times, that some our most traumatic moments, if we allow them, or traumatic events, I should say, in our life, if we allow it, can really be a doorway to walking in and getting to know ourselves at that soul level, really poking around in the dark places to unveil or uncover fears that we've had that we didn't know were there, and also the light parts, the gifts that we have to offer this world. And I would love for you to talk a little bit, because it takes a tremendous amount of courage to go there. And when I say go there, I mean into that dark place. And you went there. Mm-hmm. And I want to know what you discovered, that you knew that you wanted to help people. That was not an overnight epiphany. That took time for you to figure out what you were going to do. So can you talk to us around some of the very tangible things that you did, and when you knew that you needed help outside of yourself to really walk with you through that very dark time?
Yeah. The first year after Skylar died, I didn't get help, and I thought I could do it myself and that I was fine, but I was not fine. Every part of my life was suffering. My relationship was suffering. My health was suffering. Right after Skylar died, I developed a speech impediment that was trauma induced and migraines. And I wasn't really leaving my room to do much except work, which, I didn't find joy in at all anymore. And like I said, my relationship, and I was angry. I didn't see it at the time, but I was angry. And
who are you angry at? Were you angry at Skylar? Were you angry at yourself? Were you angry at God? What did you discover about your anger?
I was dealing with a lot of guilt and regret that I needed to work through. And I think the anger was for a lot of things. I think I was partly angry at Skylar for not getting better, or for, doing this to us. And I was angry at myself. What could I have done to change this horrific outcome? So that first year, I remember right before I got help, I was pretty depressed. I would say I was depressed. And I went downstairs to talk to my partner, Scott, and I remember crying and just saying, I don't know how to be happy. I don't think I'll ever be happy again. And like, I meant that in my soul. Like, I knew in that moment I needed to get help.
And I think that that is so important, because I do think that it can take us time to be in that deep space of grief where sometimes we're not ready. We all need to arrive at that place where we're willing to actually get help, because there's work involved, as you know.
Yeah.
And I think what'd you say?
Hard work.
Hard work. And I think it's counterintuitive, because I think, oftentimes leaning into our grief feels counterintuitive because it's so deeply painful, that there is this fear that if we really give in and lean into that pain, that it actually might blow us apart. We may not survive it. And in fact, just the opposite is true. The more we lean into it, the more it helps to relieve that intensity and actually can bring us closer spiritually to those that have passed on and transitioned to the other side. Now, I will say the caveat to that not everyone believes that there is life after death. All of my listeners know, though, that is my belief. And I know, of course, that is your belief.
Yeah.
I'd like to thank BetterHelp for sponsoring this ad. Hey guys, I want to take a minute to offer an opportunity for those of you who've been searching for a mental health therapist and haven't had any luck getting callbacks. I know it's challenging to find help, so I've partnered with BetterHelp. They are the world's largest therapy service, and they are 100% online. With BetterHelp, you can tap into a network of over 30,000 licensed and experienced therapists who can help you with a wide range of issues. To get started, you just answer a few questions about your needs and preferences in therapy. That way, BetterHelp can match you with the right therapist from their network. Then you can talk to your therapist however you feel comfortable, whether it's via text, chat, phone, or video call. You can message your therapist at any time and schedule live sessions when it's convenient for you. If your therapist isn't the right fit for any reason, you can switch to a new therapist at no additional charge. With BetterHelp, you get the same professionalism and quality you'd expect from in-office therapy, but with a therapist who is custom-picked for you. More scheduling flexibility at a more affordable price. Get 10% off right now on your first month at betterhelp.com/rockyourshine. That's betterhelp.com/rockyourshine. Now back to our episode. So let's talk about the work. You have now entered into also doing grief and loss coaching. So talk to me about when you were doing your own work, what was the process for you? How do you feel like that work helped you? Because I do know that you had some pretty debilitating guilt. I think guilt, depending on the relationship at the time of our loved one's death, can be crippling. I don't think we talk about guilt enough, and how that can really weigh us down. And like I said, it can be crippling. So talk to us about your process. What was it like for you when you were doing your own grief work? What did that healing look like? Because you talked about you had relationship issues, like our grief leaks out all over the place, right?
Yeah. Yes. That was a great way to put it. It does. It just leaks out, whether you want it to or not. And, it wasn't super clear. So I wasn't seeing it I wasn't seeing it like other people around me were seeing it, like, especially my partner, Scott, who, God bless him. He put up with a lot of shit, if I can say that. But yeah, I mean, I was not a picnic for a year, and he was very understanding about it all, but I just didn't see it. He was saying, you need to talk to somebody. You need to talk to somebody. And I'm like, I'm not ready. I don't want to. I'm not, other people in my family said, kind of directed me to maybe talking to somebody. And I did it when I was ready.
How did you know you were ready, though? I mean, I get that question so often because I even think back when I was grieving my brother and I moved into the guest bedroom because I was waking up at all hours of the night, bawling my eyes out. I couldn't get relief anywhere. I was screaming into my pillow. I mean, I was going through some horrific. I had taken a leave of absence from work. I had my boss telling me to go get counseling, and I just was freaking out on everybody. And I just remember that I couldn't tolerate being in my own skin anymore. Like I didn't know what to do. And you say that in the clip we showed. I don't know what to do. And grief can feel that way. You can't climb out of your own body, even though you want to. And of course, you could move to alcohol and drugs to numb it for a while. It's not a great solution because I can promise you, if the drugs and alcohol do not kill you, that grief will find its way. It will find its way. And so
it stays in you no matter what you're doing. Your body remembers, your mind remembers, everything is still there. It doesn't go away. You're just prolonging the inevitable of having to deal with it or staying stuck and
making yourself very sick in the process.
Yes. And I wasn't feeling good. And I'm a tip before Skylar, I'm somebody who regularly exercises and takes care of myself and is generally happy. And I didn't even recognize myself anymore after Skylar died. There were times I just didn't even, what's the point? Like I was in so much pain that I think at that first year mark, around that first year mark, I think I just realized I can't do this anymore. Cause I think I'd been distracting myself and in not, just trying to avoid feeling that immense pain. Like, as you know too, I would start to cry, but suck it back in because I just couldn't go there. And then when I did start doing the grief work, I started to feel those emotions, and it was hard. But in order to get where I'm at now, I had to do that. I had to deal with my guilt, deal with my anger, deal with my sadness, deal with all the heavy, raw emotions that come with grieving. And the loss of my son was traumatic. He was my only child. So, and you don't ever get back to who you were before. I don't think that that's possible. It changes you on so many levels.
So let's talk about,
you're a different person, but that doesn't mean it can't be a productive, happy life.
So let me ask you this. How did you reconcile your guilt around, I mean, unless you want to share the guilt that you had, I'm not sure that why you felt guilt matters as much as how you dealt with your guilt. Because I think that in hindsight, when we lose somebody quickly and traumatically, that we always can look back and say, I wish I could have, would have, should have stuff. And I know that that was your experience as well. Where are you now with that guilt? And how did you come to a place of forgiveness?
Yeah, I had a lot of guilt. I I think I talked about this in the first podcast, that I would go to bed every night crying and talking to Skylar and saying I was sorry over and over again, just for, my guilt came from just going back over my life with him and thinking, what could I have done that could have changed this outcome? And through the work that I did, I was able to realize that I did everything I could possibly do to save my son. I mean, the 10 years he was in active addiction, I didn't do things perfectly, but I did everything I could to save him. And, nobody's going to do it perfectly. And I think through journaling and letters I wrote to Skylar and letters I wrote from Skylar back to me, some really hard things. And I would say, I mean, my guilt was at 8, and now it's at like a 1 or 2, I think. And I think it was just processing all those feelings and coming to terms with the fact that I did the best that I could with what I
and that's, I feel like I feel tears welling in my eyes right now, because I think I'm getting emotional, because I think my niece and nephew are 10 and 5, and my brother and I were talking the other day, and really, I think from the moment a parent has a child, your only goal is to keep that child alive, and you want them to be happy and thrive, right? I mean, isn't that every parent's dream for their child? And so even though your child was an adult making adult decisions, and Annie was in a sober house, that I don't think that feeling of a parent of wanting to keep their child alive ever goes away. So I think that it's incredible that you have moved on that scale of guilt in where you are now. And I know that it took a lot of work to get there, and a lot of processing. And you did that through talking in therapy. You did that through writing it out, which I highly recommend to people. There's a lot of research behind working through hard emotion through writing. And so I just am curious as to what you would say to those people who are really grappling with guilt, really struggling to get through that and let their guilt go. What would you say to them?
that we are imperfect human beings. And as parents, as human beings, we are doing the very best that we can while we're raising them, while we're dealing with these really hard things in life, like substance use disorder. Is you're not trained to do that. You're not trained to watch your child disappear in front of your eyes. I think reconciling with yourself that you're human and that we all make mistakes and that we have done the best we can for our kids, for our adult kids, for, that guilt is, as you've said before, not serving me or anybody else. That's not going to bring them back. It's going to keep you stuck. So working through that grief by talking to somebody, I think talking to someone is what helped me the most.
Yeah. And I can appreciate that, because I think, you and I have talked about the distinction, and there's lots of definitions out there, that distinction between guilt and regret, and I think
Yes.
that, regret, we all have regrets, right? I mean, in hindsight, of course, we learn so much, and we only learn throughout these different experiences. Some people call it mistakes. I choose to call them experiences, because it's only through the experiences and failures that we really learn and grow. That's how we evolve. And I think that guilt is a very different, I think the definition of guilt and what that really means is very different from regret. Because I think with guilt, it's when we're doing something and we know it's harming someone, but we do it anyway. And affair is an affair is a perfect, I just think, is a really great example of that. We know an affair is not fair to our partner, and yet we choose to do it anyway. And we are very aware that it is certainly hurting ourselves, because we're living a duplicitous life. And we also know that if our partner finds out, that it is also going to deeply hurt them. I think that is a better definition of guilt. And I think that, as
And
you
I think I came to realize that there wasn't ever a time in my life I wanted to harm my son, ever. And
exactly.
I think that did come into play in how I forgave myself, was that my only intentions were to help my son, was to keep him alive. Whether I did a good job or not a good job of that was my intention. My son knew that. We were super close, and when you're in it, like I said, it's so emotional that it's hard to be really clear about the path to take through addiction. I mean, it's a hard road to take, and it's grief that entire time that you're in it, with someone you love.
Absolutely. And I think that when I think about reconciling with self, it's around true self compassion. And I think we hear the word compassion, it's a buzzword. It's another one of those words that I'm not sure people truly understand, because when we have true self compassion, we are treating ourselves and tending to our suffering the way we would tend to a child who is suffering. And we are so hard on ourselves, and we are so judgmental, which I think is why we are so judgmental as a society with other human beings. Because if we cannot truly hold ourselves in compassion for our humanness and give ourselves that grace, how can we truly extend that to other people who make these egregious mistakes in life, truly egregious, where they really cause deep harm to other human beings? And as you said so beautifully, that parents want their children to live and have a beautiful, happy life. But we are human, we are flawed, and therefore we are not going to be perfect parents. It's impossible, And there isn't a parent alive that can't look back and wish they had done something different with the new knowledge they have. But that's not the way life works. We learn through experience.
Yeah.
So, kind of bringing this full circle to where we are now, what made you decide to go back and get your certification as a grief and loss coach?
I had been thinking about it for a while, that I wanted to do something to help other people. And, I went through a couple ideas, and I finally decided that I wanted to help other people going through what I had been going through, what I will always go through, because you always kind of have that there. It's doesn't fully ever go away. But I wanted to help other people experience that hope and that meaning that you can find in your life after such a significant loss.
And I know now that you've worked with some clients, and how does it feel to be on the other side where, you're holding the loss of your son and that experience? Because as you said, that will never go away. It's not as though all of a sudden you're like, it's wonderful. My son is gone and I'm okay with that, because we know that that is not the case. You have moved forward and integrated the loss of your son into your life and into your work. So what does it feel like for you now to be helping other parents who are where you were?
Yeah, it's incredibly healing for me to help people find that hope in themselves, that life does go on and can have so much meaning, and that your person can be incorporated into your life still, even though they are not here physically. I believe that they are here and they are with us, and we can incorporate them in our lives. I talk to Skylar every day. I feel like, he's my silent partner in all of it.
I love that. I love that he's your silent partner. And you get the messages from him, right?
In real life, he was anything but silent. He always had something to say. So he's my, if he could say stuff, he'd be in my ear all the time, but he is my silent partner.
And you get that what I was saying earlier, you get the messages from him, right? And I know that you share that on your Instagram page, Morning Skylar.
Yeah. Morning Sky.
Oh, that's right. Morning Sky Grief Coach is,
Yeah.
And we'll have your handle too. We'll have that in the show notes. What do you feel? Because I'll end with two of my favorite questions, but what do you feel like is your most profound insight that you've gained and learned about yourself through the death of your son that you did not know before?
I've learned that I am capable of so much more than I thought I ever would be in this scenario of losing my child. I didn't think I would be able to ever go on or be happy or let alone go back to school and do something so powerful as to help other people with what I had to go through. And I am asked a lot, like, how are you able to help other people go through something similar that you've been through? How are you able to not have that be so depressing? And I don't know, but I know that I love it, that I have loved watching people go from that dark place to a place of hope, to a place of aliveness again. It's so healing and rewarding, and I'm blessed to be able to, and honored to be able to do it.
Beautiful. So let me bring us back to my final two questions. The first question is, what does self-love look like for you now?
Last time I was on here, those things are still true for me. Exercising in nature and mindfulness and meditation are all super important to me and keep me grounded. But I've also learned that self-care for me is saying no. Without excuses and without justification, because I am a pretty introverted person, like as far as going out with people. And since Skylar died, there are things I don't want to do. And so self-care is saying no and not having to justify why. And setting boundaries.
All right, last question. Complete this sentence for me. Hope is.
Hope is belief and confidence that I'm where I'm supposed to be, and that, even in difficulty and despair, that everything's going to be okay and everything's going to work out the way it should.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for being here today. And just quickly again, for all of you who'd like to find Becky, she is taking clients. And I know this to be true because we talked about it before we started recording. She has got some spaces left, and I would suggest you snatch them up before they are gone. And you can find her at Morning Sky Grief Coach on her Instagram. That will be in the show notes. And anything else you would like to say to our listeners?
Yeah, it's, I don't want to sound cliche, but, the biggest thing that helped me, I think, through everything, through all of it, was when I let go and faced my emotions and looked at it in more holistic way, like that I had to take care of myself. I had to take care of my emotionally and physically. I needed to all those pieces. And when I realized that and I started to do that, things started to slowly get better.
Great. Well, I want to thank you. I want to thank all of our listeners. Again, I highly recommend if you have not had a chance to see the first episode, we'll also have a link to the first episode that we did with Becky back in March of 2022. If you'd like to watch that first to hear her whole story, where she was then and where she is now. And I love you all. Thank you for tuning in. I hope that this conversation brought you some measure of hope to your own life. So take care, and we'll see you guys here again next week. Bye for now.